Hello, everyone. Welcome to our special event this evening in conjunction with the exhibition Cut Up, Cut Out, currently on view at the Massillon Museum through this Sunday, August 23rd. I'm 𝘊𝘶𝘵 𝘂𝘶, Executive Director for the Massillon Museum, and I have been looking forward to this event since we have started working with the incredibly talented artists in this exhibition. We are broadcasting from Massillon, Ohio, but we'll be connecting with artists in the show who are calling in from Miami and San Francisco. I wanted to begin by acknowledging the support of GREIF Paper Mill and Massillon for their sponsorship of the exhibition, and the exhibition organizers at the Bedford Gallery at the 𝘊𝘶 Center for the Arts are credited with assembling this phenomenal, awe-inspiring assembly of artists from around the globe. Carrie Lederer was the curator of this exhibition, and Massillon is the second to last venue on its approximately 4-year tour. We've been incredibly honored to host this. It was our comeback exhibition after the stay-at-home order, and it has been incredibly well received. And the artists joining us tonight are going to provide us some insight into their process and the inspiration behind their work. And we'll have a conversation about what you can see in the exhibit and perhaps other projects they're working on as well. I wanted to let everyone know that you will have an opportunity to pose your comments and your questions to the artists tonight by typing into the comment section on Facebook, and I'll let everyone know when we will turn it over to our viewers to help guide the conversation, but feel free to add comments and questions at any time. We'll be monitoring that part of Facebook. The Massillon Museum is a museum with free admission. It is supported in large part by the Massillon community by way of their property tax dollars, a number of operating supporters such as the Ohio Arts Council, Arts in Stark, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and Visit Canton. A host of other supporters make all of our programs possible, but I want to provide a special acknowledgement to those operating grantees, as well as all of our other supporters. Joining us tonight is also Anna Young, Administrative Assistant for the Massillon Museum. She'll be helping facilitate your questions as well. And Brandon Rohr is offering some technical support. So if you hear us refer to those other two Massillon Museum staff members, you'll know who we're talking about. Without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our panelists. And Anna's going to show you some of their images as we facilitate the introductions. So let's start with Donna Ruff. For years, Donna Ruff worked as a graphic designer, communicating in her own words, economically. But in 2011, she began experimenting with how newspapers could be manipulated and transformed through cutting, and how that relationship between negative and positive space interfaced with her imagination. Ruff's work resides in a number of collections, including those of the Library of Congress, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and Yale Art Gallery. She received her MFA from Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers University, her master's from Florida State in art history, and her Bachelor of Arts from the University of Miami Arts. So Donna, if you'd like to unmute and say hello before I introduce our next artist, you're welcome to do so. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everybody. I'm calling you from beautiful Miami Beach, Florida. I'm so happy to be here. I'm really so honored that Massillon Museum and all of the staff invited us, and wish that we could get on a plane and come together, but that's not going to happen. But anyway, thank you for the introduction, and you know, I look forward to talking to my fellow artists and answering questions, whoever has questions.
Wonderful. This is a real treat because it's not often that we're able to facilitate the access to artists from across the country. So one of the silver linings, I suppose, of the unfortunate challenges that we're all facing right now, but we're so glad that we could all be together. Thank you, Donna. Next, I'd like to introduce Brian Singer, also known as Some Guy. He's a San Francisco-based artist whose projects have received international attention. His art ranges from intimate works with paper and books to large-scale installations and participatory projects. The 1000 Journals project, which he launched in 2000, was turned into a book, a feature-length documentary, and has been exhibited at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art and the Skirball in Los Angeles. Recently, Singer launched the provocative project, where photos of people using their phones while driving placed onto billboards in the San Francisco Bay Area, gaining widespread attention across regional broadcast media outlets about this distracted driving phenomenon. As a graphic designer, Singer has created work for Apple, Adidas, Facebook, Chronicle Books, and many others. He served as president of the San Francisco chapter of AIGA, the Professional Association for Design, and taught at Academy of Art University. We're so happy to have you with us this evening, Brian. Thanks for joining us.
Hey everyone, super happy to be here joining you from San Francisco, where unfortunately it feels like half the state's on fire right now and it smells like a campfire, but it sounds like most people are staying safe. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm glad you're staying safe. And yes, we're so sorry to hear about what's happening over there, and hope you and your friends and family continue to stay safe. And last but not least, we also have Francesca Pastine from the San Francisco area as well, a visual artist whose studio practice is informed by a larger global trends and their relationship to the personal. She is specifically interested in the intersection of form and content and considers her approach to materials as a conduit to meaning. Pastine is a recipient of the Eureka Fellowship through the Fleischhacker Foundation's, a Pollock Krasner Grant, and a Kala Art Institute Fellowship. Pastine's work has been included in exhibitions at the Museum of Craft and Design in San Francisco, Housley Institute of Contemporary Art in Charleston, the Center for Contemporary Art Santa Fe, and the National Gallery in Sofia, Bulgaria, among many others. Francesca received her MFA from the San Francisco Art Institute and is represented by Eleanor Harwood Gallery. Thank you so much also for being with us this evening, Francesca.
Hi, I want to thank you, Alex, for doing such a fabulous job with this exhibit and with the media around it, as well as your staff who have just been fabulous. And thank you so much, and I'm honored to be here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Well, I again want to credit the Bedford Gallery and in particular the assistance of Alicia Koldberg-Martinez. She and their team have been so helpful in navigating the ways in which we can make this exhibit happen during the pandemic. And again, I'm just so thrilled that you're all here with us. And if you'd like to all come on screen and join us, and Anna, perhaps we can just facilitate everyone's view so we can see their faces and start the conversation, that would be great. So I had been telling some of you earlier in our call that the feedback for this exhibit that people have willingly given as they've left the gallery is nothing short of, indicating they've been awestruck. They are so taken with the variety, the global representation, the intricacy, the attention to detail, the creativity. It's been such a stimulating exhibition, particularly being among the first that anyone has seen in 5 months since we've all, since we've closed down so much of the art venues here in the community. So thank you for being part of that. I really appreciate it. And I know our staff has as well. And one of you all happen to work in paper, although you work in many other media, I know, but the work that you've created for this exhibition happens to be paper-based material. And I wondered for you, is part of the intrigue of that medium testing the limits of a material that is so fragile and ephemeral. And I'd like to maybe ask, I guess, Donna, I see you on my screen first. Maybe Donna, if you could speak to that and we can sort of get feedback from each of you.
Well, I guess what I'm working with the newspaper is about as ephemeral as you can possibly imagine. Most people just throw it out. Well, the people that actually are still getting print editions, that is, print editions really being under attack. And yes, I mean, the fragility of the paper is very seductive in a way, because when you can manage to cut it into patterns like we do, and still have it maintain its the body of the paper, it's really kind of amazing. And then when people look at it, they have this idea in their mind that the paper is very fragile. And when you see it cut into these very elaborate patterns, it's kind of embedded in the meaning of what you're looking at. And I think that it makes it more interesting and more compelling in a way. But paper is oddly strong as well. So it really has both of those aspects to it. I mean, think about paper that's been around for, you know, a zillion years, millennia. We can still dig up paper from old manuscripts. Of course, back in way back, it wasn't really paper, it was parchment, it was made with skins. But anyway, that's my take on it.
Great, thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I think that, you know, growing up as a child, I always loved reading books, and it was sort of my window to some sort of either the outside world, places I couldn't travel, places that didn't exist. And, you know, as time has progressed and technology has moved on, I still cling to books. I still read physical books. I haven't quite gotten to the point where I've adopted like a Kindle or anything. And I understand why those are successful, but there's something about the physical object and the tactileness of the book and the experience of the paper that I still love. And so in my artwork, it's that attachment to that I think I'm sort of still unwilling to give up in this sort of like dying art form of like the physical manifestation of a book. So for me, it's I think that childhood attachment, and then layered on that is all the meaning that using those books, you know, the content of the book itself, or using the New York Times, for example, or a magazine, brings to the artwork itself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you and Donna and Francesca all also have a certain genre of book for you, Brian, and Donna for you, the New York Times, and Francesca, the art form magazines. That, you know, interestingly, there is a relationship with content there as well, in all three of your cases. But Francesca, if you could also speak to that idea of what is so alluring about the paper medium and your particular choice of selection of medium for this exhibit.
Well, interestingly enough, I've always been interested in paper, and particularly in a feminist perspective, and that it's sort of defying the large canvas and predominantly a male genre of painting in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So I was very attracted to that, and particularly if you think of the work, I don't know if you guys know Nancy Spiro, who was a fabulous feminist artist in the 70s, who, by the way, is married to 𝘊𝘶𝘵 𝘖𝘶𝘵. Both passed away now, but she did a series of work on paper scroll with a print medium, using the paper again as a feminist icon. And I actually started off with the New York Times. I've done quite a bit of work on the New York Times, which I actually started using to inform patterns that went into my paintings back in the mid-90s. And I have subscribed to the New York Times since I was fresh out of probably high school. And I just love the feel of that newsprint, and I love all the odd little markings on it and the serrated edges and just the where you pull it through the press. There's so many interesting details in and of itself. And I started using it particularly during the Iraqi war to highlight the Iraqis that were killed in that war. With the art form, I became interested in that just because of the actual heft of it and because it's a square object rather than, sorry, rectangle and its unique thickness. It was object-like, and I felt like it lent itself really, really well to sculpture.
Thank you. Yes, that's, I think, obviously what we all revere and admire about artists is that they have an ability to see something in that we aren't able to see, or they're able to translate something that, and in your case for objects, all of you also repurpose artifacts. And I think that's also an interesting point of connection between the three of you. And I wonder, you know, beyond content, this aspect of repurposing and, you know, imposing your vision upon an extant object, if you could, you know, speak to that, and we can go backwards. If Francesca, you would like to start.
Yeah, I'm actually teaching a collage course at UC Berkeley in the coming up in the next semester this fall, and it's all about repurposing objects as a way of sustainability. And it is very satisfying not to contribute to a throwaway culture, to make something wonderful from what we have around us, to make the ordinary exceptional, because there's something very beautiful with objects we find in our ordinary lives. And as artists, and also as in my practice, I try to bring out meaning and collaborate, not necessarily assert my will over an object, but use it as a collaboration so that it maintains its aura, and I'm working with that in a meaningful and exceptional way.
I would like for you to speak to that question too, Brian, but then maybe you could also speak to that idea of collaboration, because I know that the participatory nature of how you leverage your artwork is also, I think, really fascinating. Maybe you could speak to that as well.
Sure. Well, I do think that there is some pretty strong correlations between all three of our works, in that, you know, taking things and transforming them in a way. For me, you know, it's interesting that, you know, people ask me, like, well, you say you love books, yet here you are destroying books. And, you know, something Francesca said, like when I go to the Friends of the Library book sale to get books, and you see just thousands of books every month, another 1,000 books, there's like this endless supply, and it does actually feel better that we're using them for something rather than ending up in landfill in some way. So it does feel good to repurpose some materials. As far as collaboration goes, it's funny because I have this love-hate relationship with collaboration, and that there are things that I want to have complete, like, OCD control over in my studio. And then there are projects that I do that are completely dependent upon the contributions and sort of participation of others. The 1,000 Journals project was me just sending out blank journals, completely dependent on what other people do with those journals, whether they throw them in the trash or they add something to them or pass them along. So it's this weird, like, I would never consider myself someone that does does projects that are, I don't know, I'm not an artist that consistently goes out and seeks that contribution and that collaboration. Instead, I'm sort of dancing around it and trying to find my way, because I am at heart sort of an introvert and don't like other people. Mostly, sometimes.
Oh, I think that's, that might speak to another question that I have after we hear from Donna. We're on the topic of repurposing materials, Donna.
Well, also on the topic of collaboration, because since I'm working with the front page of the newspaper, and I'm really starting with the photograph, and the photographs on the New York Times, since I started working with color, which I think was maybe, I know the date, but I can't think of it now, but as soon as I started working with color, the whole front page changed. And the work that these photojournalists are doing, I mean, they are really heroes. The bravery that it takes to go into the center of things and to really grab an image that really says it all. And when I'm cutting one of the pages, I'm really thinking about what I can do to kind of bring attention to parts of that image, and also to cut away some parts of it, and to kind of bring a new context to the image. I sort of feel like without that photograph or the other little photographs that are on the front page, my work doesn't have nearly the impact that it would. And I'm thinking about taking away content so that what's left, you really need to spend a little time with to see what's going on there. And sometimes there'll be like just a little picture of, you know, I have to say that since the era of Trump, I really try to not use pages that have him on it. I think I have one where Trump appears in very small. You know, I'm really interacting with whatever is on the page and whatever the editors have decided to run that day. As far as the recycling, I mean, I don't like to think of it as recycling. You said repurposing, that's really a better word. My grandparents, as I said in the little vignette that you guys prepared, my grandparents had a scrap paper company in Chicago. And so to me, paper is really in my DNA, and the idea of all of those books and newspapers and flyers and everything else being recycled, that, I mean, I'm pretty old, you know, we're going back like a lot of years. So really it's just something that I didn't do it purposely, like, oh, I'm going to honor my grandparents this way, but it is something that I really have grown up with.
You said something about the images, the patterns, what you take away, and what you're presenting to the viewer really forces someone to spend a little more time, mm-hmm. You know, interfacing with the artwork. And I've noticed, I mean, that is also a commonality between the work that each of you has represented in the exhibit, and a lot of your peers in the show also, is that the level of intricacy or the viewer's fascination with the process is something that really forces a lengthier amount of time spent with each artwork. So people are spending more time in the exhibitions because I think they're trying to dissect how it was that this came together. There's the aesthetic level, there's the beauty, the aesthetic interest that something conveys, and then there's this other level. And earlier when I was thinking about our conversation tonight and thinking about words that I've heard others express when we've talked about the show, they are process, and then watching your videos too, some of these came up: process, perfection, precision, and patience. And I think Francesca had mentioned in her video too that there's almost like a meditative, you know, state that she enters in this excavation process and of that she engages in. And Brian, you know, just spoke to the fact that being more introverted, you know, lends itself to the time that these processes take for you all. And so maybe Donna, I could start with you and ask a little bit about that. We've had glimpses into your process, and you talked a little bit about perfection and imperfection, and you know, and precision and patience. Just that, I guess, that idea of what you bring to your art making, and perhaps, you know, is that, I guess, is that a reflection of the way in which you have always addressed your creative processes, or is it inherent to this particular facet of what you're making?
I don't think that it's always been that way for me, no. But one thing that I mentioned in the video is that when I started doing these cut paper pieces, I have a way of kind of going in and out of the studio. Like I don't know, I'm not a kind of person that goes there and, you know, I'm there for 12 hours and I'm just completely involved in what I'm doing. I concentrate so hard when I'm doing what I'm doing that I can really only do it for short bursts of time. And so the process that I have allows me to leave the art and come back to it, which is important for me. I don't know if this is the time to show this, but I do have one piece. I'm not going to my studio because of the pandemic, so I'm home, and I kind of made the little ad hoc studio at home. But anyway, here's a piece that that I just finished last week. And the way that I do these is that I create the pattern on the computer and I print it out on a regular sheet of bond paper. And then with the light box, I put it on top of the newspaper page, and I cut through both of them at the same time with an X-Acto knife. It's not perfect. In fact, I like that it's not perfect. There are overcuts, there are, you know, kind of funky shapes if you really start to look at it, because it's done by hand, it's not done by laser. So that's pretty much still important to me. And as far as the meditative, I would love to say, yes, it's really meditative, and I sort of get into the zone, but I really don't. Honest to God, I don't. I listen to podcasts, I listen to, you know, music. I just know that this is going to take me X amount of hours, and, you know, and I'm happy as it goes along, and I'm looking like, okay, this is going to be on this part, and I'm constantly looking at the image and lifting up the pattern. So I get involved in it, but I can only do it for short bursts of time.
Thank you. What about you, Brian?
You know, it's funny because I think that I strive for perfection, and maybe this whole, you know, pursuit and exploration of my art practice is me just getting used to that there is no perfect. No matter what I do, there are always defects, there are always issues, and maybe I need to let that go, you know, as part of my own human development. I do think there's something to sort of what Donna was saying about, I flip back and forth between the meditative and sort of the like jumping from thing to thing. And for me, it's a little bit like there are times where there are decisions that need to be made, like big picture decisions. And then there are times when it's like straight, I need to cut up, you know, 16 feet of, you know, half-inch paper of books, and it's just straight cutting. And I sort of jump back and forth between those two mindsets, because one is thoughtless and I can listen to the audiobooks or podcasts or whatnot. And then there are others where I have to have everything off because I actually need to think and decide and plan before I go off into that just repetitive behavior.
Very interesting. Francesca?
Actually, I think when I want to kind of get back to collaboration, because I wasn't specifically addressing that within specifically my artwork, and I did a whole series for a few years called Unsolicited Collaboration with Artcore magazine. So I really addressed that in a specific way, and I could talk to that if Anna would like to go to my piece. Can she do that? 𝘊𝘶𝘵 𝘖𝘶𝘵, Unsolicited Collaboration with 𝘊𝘶𝘵, which is the table piece.
I'm glad you're going to talk about that a bit, because in your video, I was really interested in how that concept of unsolicited collaboration came about. I thought, did someone just sending her all this?
Oh, it's this one. Okay, so my work with Artform magazine is a way for me to mess with authority. And as artists, I think we give a lot of our power away. And after I decided I wanted to work with the art form, I decided to use the cover artist as an unsolicited collaboration. So I am inspired by the art on the cover, and this is very, very specific, and it's also a very complex piece. 𝘊𝘶 𝘵 is a very fabulous French conceptual artist, and the cover shows some of his odd books. And I guess if I point to it, you can't see it. On the cover on the upper left, you'll see a structure. Well, I actually had that, I actually had that structure recreated to put the piece on top. So that's a very specific collaboration with the actual use of the structure that he made, that I actually made as well. The paper is, the magazine is cut through and the center parts are falling forward. Now, when I do these magazines, I absolutely do not use glue, and I do not rearrange any of the paper. They're specifically how they are in the magazine, just remanipulated. Because I cut the paper falling from the magazine, I've cut a hollow out in the magazine, which is reflected in the mirror on the bottom, where you see the little sun. And that's an Andy Warhol piece. So it's a very complex piece. It sits on an invisible shelf. The pieces fall forward. I had to create and design the box and then recreate with a furniture maker the actual piece or the furniture support that is actually on the cover of the magazine. So I really, with the unsolicited collaborations, got a lot of wonderful inspiration from artists whom I just really, really love and have looked at all my life. And it was, you know, just a fabulous project in that way. As far as process, I like working in a slow pace and investing time in the things that I make. And again, when I was in undergrad, I was very interested in feminist art, and specifically the idea of repetitive movement, as in folding, ironing, and things that, you know, have specifically been in the women's realm historically, and embracing those processes as a nod to the women's movement.
I think that's really powerful when I think, you know, you can understand too the way in which your medium and your vision can help leverage and advocate and message feelings about particular issues or movements, as you mentioned, like the feminist movement, and how you incorporate and present your work in such a way too that's a nod to that. And I was thinking to Brian of the series on assassinations and the powerful pieces of that you've titled John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. from 2017. And I wondered if you could, you know, speak to the ways in which you incorporate messaging on, you know, broader topics and societal issues and challenges in your work.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think our country has been, you know, maybe a little plagued by the gun violence for, you know, ever, it seems like. And, you know, every time one of these events happens, there's, you know, a huge outpouring, and there's a lot of sort of work that's created in an attempt to try to change things, or at least increase awareness in some way. And, you know, as I was noodling some of these events, it got me thinking about maybe a slightly different way of approaching, whatever challenge our country has with this particular topic, which I still don't know I completely understand. But I went down this path of thinking through gun fetishism and sort of the way that we, even as kids are brought up to sort of love this object in some way, or at least little boys tend to be. And the series is based on the weapons that were used to assassinate leaders. So the one that's on screen that's the rifle that was used to assassinate Martin Luther King Jr. And the process is essentially taking books that were written by or about Martin Luther King Jr. and printing the image of the gun on pages of those books. And then those books are cut up into little slices, and the image of the gun is reformed just using the edge of the paper. So if you can imagine, what you're seeing right now is like thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of paper lined up on edge, where the image is not printed on the face, but it's actually printed on it's printed on the face of the page, and you're looking at the image created with just the sliver on the edge of the paper. Really hard to describe without seeing it in person or some sort of demonstration. But again, to me, this was about combining something that can be visually pleasing to people, the image of a gun, or when you look at this, you might think that's a nice image, but with something that's absolutely horrific. So really the intent is for you to have mixed feelings when you see this sort of oh, that's beautiful or interesting or intricate, and at the same time sort of have a sinking pit in your stomach of like, oh wait, this is about the death of Martin Luther King Jr. And sort of that juxtaposition sort of mapping to what I feel like our country still struggles with. It's like this love affair with guns that we can't quite quit, yet it keeps causing us tremendous amounts of pain.
I think also, if those who view this stop and think, are cognizant of the thousands and thousands of pages that comprise this, and the fact that you're living with this concept. I mean, I'm not sure how long, your process, takes from the ideation and the planning to the sourcing to then the production, but it's also, there's not an immediacy, right, to this project. So this process. So you're also spending a lot of time laboring over and thinking about this very, this very tough topic, and this very sad event that this is referencing, of course. So I think when I had seen these images, when I think about the process involved too, that the process compounds the gravity of it. And when you think about all of the texts that you source also referencing Martin Luther King too. Donna, you are looking at the front pages of New York Times, and you are sourcing also some really, especially now, heavy stuff, for lack of better words. And so, to what extent are you, Donna, also leveraging that desire to sort of make sense of the senseless, I guess, and exploring these topics through, in what you present to us as viewers?
Well, I'm not trying to make sense of the senseless. What I'm trying to do is highlight what's happening and to kind of create an archive of an event, because the news kind of flies by, especially if people don't even read print editions, and their screen will change within a number of hours and the stories change. The greater part of the newspaper piece, if you want to bring on a screen back, I can kind of have an image up there while I'm talking. Anyway, I did a whole series with the Syrian migrants, after I had started the series with cutting these Islamic patterns, I had started it during the Arab Spring. During the Arab Spring, when everybody was feeling very optimistic, even though it was a violent time, you know, and people trying to change the government and bring down these dictators. But still, it felt kind of like, you know, we're going in the right direction, until all of a sudden we're not going in the right direction, and all of these children and families were trying to escape Syria. And of course, everybody remembers that image of that 3-year-old boy. And it just was heartbreaking. I mean, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, and these things just affected me so much that I wanted to do work that that would create something that was forever, and even after people weren't thinking about it, that it, excuse me, that it was still going to last. And sorry. And then more recently, I've been doing work on textiles. So if we can go to those last couple of images, yeah. And this is a show that we installed at my studio building. We have a nice little gallery in there. And these are images from the so-called caravan of migrants from Central America. And these images are from the news sources from Honduras and Guatemala and Mexico. And they are printed on actual blankets. And the front has an image from the news, and the back, if you go to the next slide, is an image of the American flag. And I wanted people to see the colorful images when they came in. And then as they go to the back of the room, and they see these black and white flags, so the flag has all the color drained out and it's kind of in tatters. So they're printed and laser cut. Now, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because last night I started watching this series called Immigration Nation, which is on Netflix. And these filmmakers were able to get incredible access into the operations of, I'm sorry, my dog is gonna bark at people outside. The operations of ICE. Hey, Maya, stop. And I thought, you know, sorry, coming right back. All right, you gotta stop that.
It's okay. This is part of the charm and the intimacy that this.
I had the feeling she was going to start barking just when I was talking. Otherwise, I would have muted myself. Anyway, she sits there and waits for something to bark at outside. And you know, I hope so fervently that Biden is elected, and this zero tolerance that the Trump administration has started with rounding up immigrants and even people who have not committed any crimes at all, but they are here illegally. And just if they're here illegally, they have to go. It doesn't matter how long they've been here. And I thought, well, suppose Biden gets elected, suppose this all goes into the past. Still, my work is kind of like a marker of a particular time. And that's what I think of with the New York Times pieces as well, is I'm very engaged with the actual content of the news, and that's what interests me about it. I like to think that I'm bringing something to people's attention, and it's not going to go away. This is an actual object that's not going to go away.
I think that's something that you all three also have in common. Mm-hmm. I think that if the three of you submitted work that was to encapsulate a particular time period, I think it could do that very effectively. I think with the conversations that you're initiating and the content within the source material as well. I mean, both, I think it plays together in a really interesting way. We have a question from Brandon. Brandon, and remember, if you're watching us on Facebook, please feel free to comment. We'll share comments. We'll have archived those. And also we would love to pose questions to our artists this evening. that you have. Brandon asks, has there ever been a medium that you've wanted to work in, but couldn't, or perhaps haven't had the opportunity to? Francesca, would you like to?
Sure. I stayed with painting throughout most of my school years and careers, although I kept trying to make the painting not a painting sometimes. I would cut the paint, I would paint on glass and peel it off and cut into it and manipulate paintings or make the painting be on the floor or hang them in odd ways on the wall. So I feel like my work really informs what it wants, what it wants from me often. And lately I have been screening a lot, which is really lovely, but it's kind of somewhat of I make it very cumbersome and difficult for myself because they're very complex prints and they're only one-offs. But one thing that I wanted to get back to, and I actually took a class, and not get back to actually, one thing I've always wanted to do is ukiyo-e, or Japanese woodcuts. And I actually did take a class recently. And again, it was like going back home to the art forms, which were time intensive and accumulative, and the hand digging and the repetition of that. And I love the beautiful color that you can get from rubbing watercolor onto wood and the wood texture. So unfortunately, I haven't had a lot of time to work with it, but I'm really, really looking forward to delving into it further.
Very interesting. Cool. I'd love to see what manifests from those. Brian? Cool.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think, I feel like I have access or could, take classes or learn different mediums. I think I'm just limited by time. What I do is pretty time intensive, and it's just a trade-off between, do I want to focus on this or focus on that? Where I do find limitations is in the, how do I go about getting that done category? Donna was talking a little bit about, the people in cages essentially on the borders. And, when that was going on, I had this idea and I thought, wouldn't it be great if all those photos that are coming out of those detention centers, all of the people that were cramped together and couldn't even sit down in their pens were wearing red MAGA hats. And how do I get 3,000 red MAGA hats into the hands of them and then convince them that this is the photo op that needs to happen? Because wouldn't it be interesting if our administration thought that those people supported him in some way? And what would that create? But I was limited by I have no idea how to go about getting that done. So that's where my main limitation comes in, is when I have these ideas and I have no even concept of how to approach making that happen.
That's interesting. And you think in today's, in some respects, today's, as you said, access to tools, access to resources with the internet and how available we are to one another. There's, I guess, a sense of ease in access across the board, or I guess the illusion of that. But as you said, they're building something like that, which would be among your more participatory, projects too. I imagine it's very daunting and time consuming. Donna, what about you?
Well, the first thing that came to mind when you asked that is glass. I really have always wanted to work with glass. I've often thought about applying to urban glass in New York, can go or Pilchuck or someplace like that. But I don't know exactly what I would do and kind of get stuck there. Because sometimes when you work with a material like glass that is so seductive, or I find this is true with wax and things like that, the material takes over, and the material becomes more important than what you're doing with it, and the work isn't as strong somehow. But still in all, I mean, it would be fun. You know, when you were talking about the MAGA hats, Brian, I often wonder, because I see these artists like Jean Shin, who just did this humongous installation with a bunch of Mountain Dew bottles. And I often wonder how those artists get a hold of all of those things. I actually just started a series with commemorative t-shirts, like t-shirts that you get when you're marching. Like one was March for Our Lives that I happen to have because we took part in that, and I got a few from the Women's March, and I'm cutting them and I'm dipping them into plaster so that they're making kind of like a solid, not a solid, but like a perforated but solid plaster thing with the t-shirt. And I put something on Facebook like, hey, you know, have you guys got any commemorative t-shirts? And I got like crickets. Nobody answered me. So anybody out there in our audience, if you have a commemorative t-shirt that you don't want anymore because it's going to get cut up and thrown into plaster, I'm happy to have it.
Well, I think that's very interesting because it's sort of like this challenge that we face as museums, whereby we are now as a field, and we have been, this has been ongoing for the past maybe decade or so, actively in focused ways, you know, actively collecting, you know, artifacts and archives that reflective of this time, instead of, you know, hearkening back 100 years or so, or waiting until someone opts to donate or dispense of something, which is how so many collections were built during a period of time in our country. And, you know, this act of, you know, this process of actively pursuing the now for history museums is something that we're all talking about. And our archivist is actively documenting the pandemic, the signage around town, the mailers that we receive. You know, she's actively collecting, you know, the, you know, references to the political climate, you know, so that we can have those and analyze them for the future. But I mean, I think to your point, it's funny at the time you have this idea and you think that you know, people either don't want to dispense with them or, I don't know, maybe everyone's just so distracted right now. I'm not sure, but museums kind of face this too. It's like when we're looking for something, it's so hard to find. And, when you're not, when you've reached your cap, it's when everyone is really interested in donating a particular thing, a hat from a particular era, a wedding dress of a particular era. It comes in waves. It's really interesting. Are there, I'm referencing, I'm seeing if there are any other questions from the audience. There are several, but while I'm sort of scrolling through those, do any of you have questions for each other?
I actually have a question for Francesca, because as we were looking at your slides, you had a process image in there of a mask, a drawing, and that just opened up, like, it made me really think, like, can you talk a little bit about how, when you're excavating into art form or other objects, like, is it all a drawing that you sort of start with and then you decide how you're going to excavate, or is it based on what's on every page as you get further and further? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, certainly. But with the unsolicited collaborations, they were not as specific, and I was being inspired by the cover artist. And I would come up with a general idea, but what was really fun, like I said, I am really a painter. My father was a painter. My mom was a painter. I grew up painting, and that's my history. So when I approach the art form, and specifically the unsolicited ones, it's very painterly. I have an idea, but I actually make a cut, and then I'm constantly responding to what's underneath it, and also images that come up. So I actually will be inspired to make a different shape because there's a certain image. So it's very organic and process oriented. I don't come up with an absolute, you know, image that I want to create perfectly. It's very much like creating a painting. I'm responding constantly to color, shape, and form. and line and texture and all the things that painters do. And in fact, I have one art form magazine, which is 3 magazines with the cover of Michael Clark that are tipped, and it looks like paint is spilling out of them to reference my painterly history. With the masks, that is also my initial idea for the design. Again, I actually don't have a specific culture or mask in mind. I usually use my mind's eye. I have a general idea of where I want to go. And as I continue to make the masks, I discover certain modes of making, like certain tricks, like with the unsolicited, the trick of having the page spill out, you know, was something that I discovered and was able to utilize. With the mask, there were certain designs that I came up with and discovered. So there's this wonderful sense of, wow, this is neat. Maybe I'll work with this design as I process through the art form. So it's, again, it's very organic, it's very painterly, and constantly confronting different ways to approach it. And so there's that sense of exploration there always, otherwise I would just be bored. And the idea of perfection, even though I was a dancer for many years, I studied ballet, and any ballet dancer will tell you there's no, we strive for perfection, but being human is being imperfect. So, you know, I like the act, I like the evidence of the hand making in all my work.
Michelle asks a question to help us, I think, maybe wrap up the conversation. So this exhibit has been traveling for about 4 years, I believe, is that right? The work that you've contributed, does it return to you? What will it be like to have it back home, if that's where it's going? And what does it feel like, I guess, to be part of a traveling show like this one? And Francesca, if you'd like to start, and Donna and Brian, you can close us out.
Well, it's just been fantastic. It's just been wonderful that the work is traveling throughout the country. I don't even have to think about it. It's visiting, it's been to more places than I have. So I'm not a big traveler. So it's been to states that I've never been to, and cities that, you know, I've never would like to go to, but never have been there. And it's just super exciting that that's happening with that work, and it's reaching such a wide audience. And as you said, there's so much appreciation when viewers see the work, and that's very gratifying. It's going to be kind of sad to have it back, because it's, you know, I have to figure out how to store it, which is always an issue for artists, right? Storage. And no, it's just been fabulous, and maybe it will find a home one of these days outside of my storage, art storage unit.
Great, Donna?
Well, like Francesca, I'm really delighted that the work has been traveling. I had kind of a question in my mind what it was going to look like at the end, because conservators always ask me what I do to keep the pages from yellowing. And what I do is, all I can do really is I spray them with deacidification spray, because it's the acid in the paper that makes it yellow. And this is not going to keep them from completely yellowing. It'll probably keep them from falling apart, and they're framed behind UV glass, so that helps as well. And I'll be interested to see how they look when they come back. Everything that you make is kind of like an old friend. You're happy when they meet new friends. I've loved being in this show. There are several artists who, I mean, Francesca and I have known each other since before this all happened. I knew about her work with the New York Times. Other artists, Annie Vogt, my really good friend whose name I can't even think of right now. But anyway, other artists who work with cut paper. And so it's really nice to have the work in the company of this other work that's so wonderful. So I'll be happy to have it back. And it had a good time. It had a good old time.
Yeah, I would just reiterate both those points. It was super exciting to be a part of a show that lasted this long, alongside the Brian Detmers and Meg Hitchcocks and Jonathan Callens and all of these folks whose work I had seen and admired. Sort of for me, it was like fanboying with folks that I'd been watching for a long time. But I'm also in the frame of mind that like it was nice having them out of the studio and maybe getting them back. I do suffer from that storage space problem, so. I'm happy when things are like not in my studio. So that'll be a little bit like, oh, great, now where am I going to put you?
That's great. Well, we'll also be sad to see them go. For those of you who aren't aware, this show was supposed to have opened April 4th because of the pandemic and the stay-at-home order. We didn't open it until June 26th. And it had a nice long rest in crates safely stored within the museum. And that day when we opened those crates and got to see the work that we'd been talking about and excited to see in person for so long was such a special, exhilarating event for all of us. And again, I don't think there could have been an exhibition more fitting for ushering us back into service for the community, being in the service of exposing people to beautiful things, important messages, new and interesting processes, and artists with global perspective, and then this show. And so it's truly been an honor for us to host it. And I thank you all for being here with us this evening. I encourage everybody who hasn't yet seen the show to visit the Massillon Museum if you have the ability to travel within a short distance and safely, and exercising all the safe precautions to see it sometime between now and Sunday afternoon when it closes. If you don't have an opportunity to see it, our staff has worked to create, to enhance the audio tour that did travel with the show and to have it represent the contents of our exhibit in Massillon, and add a video component, which just launched today. So you can view the exhibition from the comfort of your home if you wish to do so, and do so safely. We also have all of the labels and the text available in Braille for those with blindness or low vision as an accessibility measure as well. So thank you all so very much again. It's been wonderful talking to you all this evening. Francesca and Brian, do stay safe in the midst of what you're facing in San Francisco right now. And hope to work with you all again another time.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.